Welcome everyone. Welcome to this webinar interactive session when we will discuss practical tools to recognize and decode disinformation. This online session is conducted within the framework of the Free TED project. Free TED stands for France and Estonia Together Against Disinformation, is a project funded by NATO Public Diplomacy Division and coordinated by the University of Tartu together with French partners, Catholic University of Lille, University of Bordeaux, University of Caen and Normandy for Peace. The goal is to bridge expertise and experiences both from France and Estonia when it comes to identifying and countering disinformation. Now, let's start to look at what disinformation is and how to recognize that. Now, let me start with an example. Look at this beautiful sculpture, in fact, this beautiful bas-relief. It tells us a story. It tells us a story that takes place 3,000 years ago when Pharaoh Ramesses, who among the other is the person who commissioned this piece of art, went to war against the Hittite Empire. The two armies met and fought in a location called Kadesh, which nowadays is somewhere located between Lebanon and Syria. And the outcome of the battle was that Pharaoh Ramesses just by luck escaped death and by luck basically escaped total defeat. Now, however, as you can see from that bas-relief, the story that this sculpture tells us is a slightly different one. It's a story of victory. It's a story of clear defeat of the Hittites by the Egyptian pharaoh, and it's a story that celebrates the greatness of the Egyptian pharaoh. Unfortunately, it's not a real story. At that time, no one debunked this, what we could call fake news, and in fact, this became, let's say, an established truth in Ramesses' Egypt. And I would say that this gives us a very good idea of how the power has always used manipulation of information or, in fact, misrepresentation of the reality in order to maintain power. And we can actually see that if we go through history, from in fact to Egypt, to ancient Greece and Rome, to the Middle Age, passing through the modern era and very much coming to contemporary times, we witness how the powerful have been manipulating information in order to gain, control and maintain power, while their opponents have used similar techniques, basically manipulating and reframing information at their own advantage to challenge them. The tools, in fact, that have been used in this ongoing battle have been either their subjects or in more recent times their citizens. In a way, this tells us that information is power, and so in fact is the ability to use and misuse it. Now, let's talk about disinformation in the context of politics and more specifically in the context of democracies. The problem with this, when disinformation meets politics, is that somehow tends to turn politics not as a moment in which you witness competition of ideas, dialogue among ideas, and even, of course, say clash among ideas, but somehow tends to increase polarization and to divide the societies into opposite fields. Societies in which enemy logic prevails, and societies in which, let's say, not talking to each other becomes the norm rather than the exception. Let me put an important point when it comes to disinformation and the way in which disinformation uses and abuses the loopholes of a democratic society. Once disinformation is spread, it's not necessarily to believe disinformation. What is important somehow is that it spreads doubt, and that somehow citizens are not able to distinguish reality from fiction. The idea is indeed that this inability to distinguish real from unreal also create this growing division among citizens and kind of create these opposite fields that that adopt this enemy logic and, let's say, do not communicate with each other. The problem in the context of democracy is that this increase division, increase polarization among citizens, and the inability to distinguish what is real and what is unreal also reduces mutual toleration in politics, which can be seen at the level of society and at the level of politics itself, and also in a way undermines the idea of democracy as a repetitive game. Now, this is more a problem for democracies than for autocracies. Why? Because disinformation is more likely to exploit the loopholes, the relaxed and open information environment that characterizes open societies. On the other hand, autocracies, given the fact that information is much more controlled and the flow of information is much more regulated, suffer much less out of these challenge. Moreover, autocracies are very often the ones that channel and fuel disinformation in order to undermine and in order somehow to challenge democracies. Maybe one additional point to this. Now, new technologies, and in particular, for example, the use of AI, might have increased the scope of disinformation and the way in which disinformation is much more pervasive in our lives. What has not changed is the goal of disinformation itself. Now, let me bring you some examples and some context that can portray how disinformation has been used and how disinformation has been challenged. Let me bring you some examples from the context of Estonia. This is Estonia. It's a small country along the eastern flank of the EU and NATO. It's a country of 1,300,000 inhabitants, which has regained its independence after more than 50 years of occupation in 1991. The country has been characterized after regaining its independence by the presence of a large Russian-speaking minority, and since 2004 is both member of NATO and the EU. Now, if you look at the map and where Estonia is located, you will basically see that, well, its largest neighbor, and in fact, the biggest conveyor of disinformation and the biggest conveyor of a challenge to its democratic stability and resilience is represented by Russia. Russia is 100 times the population of Estonia and is in fact the largest country in the world. After having lost its Soviet empire, Russia has been consistently the main source of disinformation and of malicious interference in Estonia. This has been done through different channels, but the most relevant ones somehow are Kremlin-controlled medias and a network of friendly outlets that convey that message and have conveyed that message consistently and that somehow have been playing and misrepresenting Estonia's history, memory, and overall trying to undermine the legitimacy of Estonia itself and of its democratic system. The flow from Russia to Estonia has been conveying consistently what we can call fake news, or in any case channels of disinformation that have been eating Estonia and have been primarily targeting the Russian-speaking minority in this country. Now, let me give you one example in which we can see not only disinformation in practice, but also disinformation having a very heavy cost in terms of life and in terms somehow of public safety and health. In COVID times, Russia and Kremlin-controlled medias have been somehow misrepresenting very consistently, starting from the introduction of the first vaccines, the Western developed vaccines as unsafe and as somehow a proxy of a Western malicious influence in citizens' health. This has been done through the official Kremlin channels and have been also somehow spread not only in Estonia, but I would say globally, through a network that somehow connects both official and unofficial Kremlin-friendly medias. On the other hand, basically, what we have seen is that Russia has also been consistently portraying its own COVID-developed vaccine, Sputnik, as safe and as the best tool in order to counter COVID. What we saw in COVID time was that in the EU and most of NATO countries, the Western vaccines were part of the general vaccination strategy, while Sputnik had not been approved and introduced as a safe vaccine. And now here I show you two maps. In this first map, you can see the percentage of Russian-speaking population in Estonia. The darker is the map, the darker is the region in the map, and the highest is the presence of Russian speakers in Estonia. And here I show you another map which shows the vaccination rate during COVID in Estonia. And what you will find out is that there is a quite high overlap between limited number of vaccinations and large presence of Russian-speaking minorities. What we notice is also that very often the reason put forward for not taking a vaccination was concern about its safety, and very often reference was made to misrepresented reality that originated out of Kremlin-friendly or Kremlin-orchestrated medias. This also had a clear repercussion in terms of mortality due to COVID, which was higher among Russian speakers than among ethnic Estonians. Now, after introducing you an evident case of disinformation and also of what have been the direct consequences in terms of people's lives, I want to come back to you with one example of how to counter it and how to, in fact, convey different messages that could debunk disinformation. And once again, I will bring you an example from Estonia. The idea is somehow to be able to reappropriate the space in which medias convey information, and in which somehow, especially in liberal societies, disinformation flourishes. Now, Estonia had one consistent problem, especially when it comes again to disinformation targeting minorities. It's a problem of external interference that very often has been connected to disinformation, as we saw, specifically targeting linguistic and ethnic minorities. The overall goal of this disinformation, generally conveyed through medias, was in fact to undermine the societal cohesion. And in addition, this was done through different medias, both social medias, but also printed press and also audiovisual. The solution has been a combination of different tactics. Estonia has been, starting from the second half of the last decade, has started to ban those channels that deliberately were spreading disinformation, especially the ones originated from Russia and directed from Russia, but at the same time has been developing consistently after 2014 a domestic alternative. The idea basically is that we cannot base our approach on disinformation only on banning access to information, in fact misrepresented information, but should also provide an alternative, especially for those who were primarily targeted. So in that sense, minorities and both of ethnic and linguistic background. So Estonia, starting from 2014, has developed a Russian language TV channel called ETV Plus. The focus was very much on the local dimension and very much on relating with the local communities. Now, while the budget that ETV Plus could put on the table was literally a fraction of what the Kremlin could employ in order to spread disinformation and destabilize the Estonian context, well, ETV Plus had one advantage. It could focus on the local dimension, it could involve the local communities, and it could very much report on local stories and on aspects that are very close to the heart of normal citizens. Basically, this is something that, regardless of how large the budget of Russian TV channels was, they couldn't do exactly because they didn't have access to the territory and to the local population and to the local communities. In addition, ETV Plus is not simply a copy-paste from the Estonian language channel, but it had an independent, and it still has an independent editorial board and an independent editorial policy. So in fact, was a very good way to try to counter disinformation through the development of a healthy channel of communication, an healthy channel of re-involvement of the local community in the Estonian media sphere. Now, let me tell you another story. This one brings us close to the times that we are witnessing nowadays. I wonder how many of you know who the lady in the picture is. The lady is the former Prime Minister of Estonia, candidate and future High Representative of the EU for Common Foreign and Security Policy. And she has recently been at the center of a disinformation campaign that tried to delegitimize her as a candidate and her in terms of her position, capitalizing on her past and on her background. This is a picture that has been shared by Kremlin-controlled accounts a day after her candidature as High Representative of the EU for Common Foreign and Security Policy. This picture basically represents young Kaja Kallas with her family, and basically the narrative that has been spread initially through X accounts and then through other social medias and then widely through the network of Kremlin-controlled medias is that somehow, yes, she is so Russophobe, she hates Russia so much, but look at that picture, she was very happy in Soviet time, and somehow her story in Soviet time represents a story of privilege, and in fact her approach today towards Russia and the Soviet time represents, on the other hand, a story of hypocrisy. Now, the picture, which represents in fact simply a family setting in which young Kaja Kallas is with her two parents, first of all was taken after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So any story of privilege or any story of happy life in Soviet Union simply cannot connect to this picture, simply because the picture was taken after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The family furniture that so much was narrated as, again, an example of privilege and an example somehow of status in Soviet times was in fact part of the family furniture predating Soviet occupation of Estonia. Let's also remember that Kaja Kallas' grandparents faced deportation during Soviet times, and somehow the family experienced, among others, also the horrors of Soviet occupation. Now, what we saw is that this picture has been very widely instrumentalized and has been used overall as a trigger in order to launch stories of different that went in different directions, from collaborationism during the Nazi occupation of Estonia to basically, as I said, hypocrisy, to basically presenting a story of privilege and of, let's say, inability to relate to the current context. What you can see there is basically the website of Pravda, a Russian channel which is not only friendly but Kremlin controlled, in which, let's say, the same story has been translated into different languages, into the different version of the outlet through the use of AI. You can also find out that there are evident mistakes and evident typos which are in fact generated by AI themselves. Now, how can we develop or think of ideas that can help us to respond to this challenge and basically to increase the resilience of our democratic systems while not throwing away the advantages of our open societies? And how much these tools can be used and scaled up in order basically to increase our preparation in order to counter and understand disinformation and the antibodies of the society in order to respond to these hybrid challenges. Well, I will bring here some examples from Estonia which can help somehow to, which are scalable and can help basically to understand how to tackle disinformation from a country that has been exposed to disinformation and to the challenge of disinformation for quite some time. The first approach that has been increasingly introduced in the context of Estonia in order to reduce trolls and in order to reduce malicious and voluntary spread of disinformation has been the idea to introduce authenticated comments in the most respected media channels. I'm talking about news outlets or information and news portals in which, in order to post a comment, users need to authenticate. Here the idea is that simply users need to prove that there is a human and there is an individual behind the comment that is written. It's not about censorship, it's not about self-censorship, it's more about somehow taking responsibility of what are our opinions and what are our ideas. Another idea that has been introduced with a quite high degree of success within the framework of Estonian police forces is the idea of a local web constabulary. Nowadays, in every Estonian county, there is one policeman or policewoman acting as a support in the web and in the social media realm. This can be used both to inform this constabulary about examples or presence of disinformation campaigns, but also, for example, to prevent or, let's say, to flag potential cases of cybercrime, harassment, hate speech, and so on and so forth. In addition, the local web constabulary can also advise, especially young people, but not only, on how to deal with the challenges from the web and how to basically navigate the web in a safe and responsible way. Another example from Estonia's experience is the introduction of cyber hygiene and the introduction of cyber education to a healthy and safe use of the cyber tools and of the online tools, starting from schools, and also the possibility to introduce fact-checking. This is not something that is unique of Estonia, but in the context of Estonia has been done in a way which has been perceived by the population as user and reader friendly, is widely consumed, and it's also a tool which is very user friendly. The main website that has been developed in order to convey and channel cases of disinformation and to warn the populace about this challenge is Propastop. Here you can see one example of this of this kind of user-friendly and citizen-friendly campaign, and what this campaign says is that this is the ideal way to keep Estonia clean from disinformation. Estonia has also been home of the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence. It has been introduced in Estonia exactly in the light of the country's expertise and long experience with countering disinformation. And the idea is very much that through that, it would be possible to scale up the response to disinformation and to spread the use of tools such as the ones that I introduced to you in order to counter, but first of all to identify disinformation. And maybe the last point that I would like to mention when it comes to this is another example of collaborative work among European media networks, the European Digital Media Observatory, which combines, through the presence of different hubs in different parts of the continent, medias, reliable medias that help the public to understand and identify cases of disinformation and to debunk them and make them available to the wider public. By doing this, what we actually intend to do is to reduce the impact of disinformation on open societies. As I said before, the goal of disinformation is to spread division and also to spread doubt based on the fact that citizens will not be able to distinguish what is true from what is untrue. And these tools are exactly designed and thought to reduce that, to make sure that citizens, in the light of reliable and credible information, can have a healthy democratic debate with each other without polarizing the society and without making our democratic societies divided and unhealthy. Thank you so much, and have a nice continuation of your day.